Welcome to Chapter 19, The New York School. The first influx of modern design in America came from Europe. The 1940s was a time that Americans began to approach modern design with their own creativity. We added new forms and concepts to the tradition of graphic design. In contrast to European design, which is theoretical and highly structured, American design was more pragmatic, intuitive, and informally handled the problems of organizing space. New York became the cultural center of the mid 20th century. When we start talking about the pioneers of the New York School, we have to start with Paul Rand. He was one of the innovators of American modern design. He had a strong knowledge of the modern movement in the ideologies of Klee, Kandinsky, and the Cubist, and he understood that shapes could both be symbolic and expressive as a visual communications tool. This Direction magazine cover displays the important role of visual and symbolic contrast in his design. I want you to describe for me what this cover for Direction magazine, done in 1940, symbolizes. Rand used collage and montage as a way to bring concept, images, textures, and objects to a cohesive whole. He collaborated with copywriter Bill Bernbach, and their successful collaboration became the example of the art/copy team working together to create a visual-verbal integration. In this Jazzways yearbook cover from 1946, you see collage technique, symbolic forms, and a dynamic composition. This really characterized Rand's work in the late 1930s and 40s. And on the right-hand side, for Orbach's department store, you see a combination of elements: logotype, photograph, decorative drawing, and type, and they're basically playfully unified. Rand knew the power of everyday signs and symbols to visually communicate. He took risks by exploring unproven graphic ideas. In this cover for the American Institute of Graphic Arts, design becomes like a child's game of peekaboo. You have the initials of the AIGA behind a bright green flat color plane with organic forms arranged in a face pattern over them. I think it kind of looks like a clown. And on the other one, you have a poster for the film No Way Out, done in 1950. Here you have Rand's integration of photography, topography, signs, graphic shapes, and surrounding white space really make it stand out. Think about figure-ground relationship in this one. This was very atypical of film posters of Rand's day. I want you to consider, how did Paul Rand define design? He always took interest in modern art, but he stayed true to the accessibility of the image. Later in his career, he concentrated on trademark and corporate design, which we'll talk about later on in the course. His 1946 book, Thoughts on Design, illustrated with over 8 examples of his work, inspired a generation of designers. Bradbury Thompson is the next pioneer of the New York School we're going to talk about. He was an influential graphic designer in post-war America, and his designs for Westvaco Inspirations, which was a 4-color publication demonstrating printing papers, had powerful impact. Due to his limited budget, he experimented a lot. For example, for this issue of Westvaco Inspirations 151, the vast storehouse of printed images now in the public domain became part of the modern design vocabulary and explored and used deftly by Thompson. In this next image from Westvaco Inspirations, number 186, he explored the possibilities of design by enlarging half-tone dots. And in this cover for Westvaco Inspirations 210, he took apart the 4-color process printing plates and reorganized them into a design element along with the negative image from a borrowed photo. And in this last image from a Westvaco Inspirations 210, he used letters from the name Westvaco to form a mask, echoing the masks on the opposite page. But overall, his work achieved a mastery over complex organization, form, and visual flow. Now let's talk about Saul Bass. He brought the sensibilities of the New York School to Los Angeles in 1950. Initially inspired by Paul Rand's use of shape and asymmetrical balance, he tried to reduce his designs to a single dominant image, often centered in space. His ability to take shapes and convey the ideas of this ad through the creation of glyphs enabled him to reduce American graphic design to simple images. Bass was commissioned by Otto Preminger to create unified graphic designs for the film The Man with the Golden Arm. This included logos, theatrical posters, advertising, and, on the right here, an animated film title. This film was about drug addiction, and his symbol for it became the thick pictographic arm with slag-like forms surrounding it and the title. I want you to tell me what was significant about this particular design for Bass's design career and for film titles in general. A typical Saul Bass design can be seen in the 1960 graphics for the film Exodus, about the birth of the nation of Israel. What is Bass trying to communicate with this simple pictographic image about the content of the film? Saul Bass's major contribution to graphic design was in the area of film graphics. Moving on, I want to talk about a woman art director, and her name was C.P. Pinellas. She became the first woman to be a member of the New York Art Directors Club, breaking through into a male-dominated design society. Good for her. In this cover from 1949, you see striped patterns and a mirror reflection catching your eye. She often commissioned illustration from fine artists, and her publication designs were characterized by this appreciation of color, pattern, and form. Moving onward, we're going to discuss Otto Storch. He became the art director for publications such as Better Living and McCall's after he was a student of Harper Bazaar's art director Alexei Brodovich. As one of Brodovich's students, he learned to examine design problems thoroughly, develop a solution from the resulting understanding of the problem, and then search for a brilliant visual presentation. In these pages from McCall's, you see typography unified with photography in a way that it never has before. So what can you tell me about how type and image are used specifically in these two layouts? Storch was one of the major innovators of the period. I want you to tell me what was his editorial design philosophy, because this philosophy influenced both editorial and advertising graphics on a large scale. Our next innovator is Henry Wolff. He also studied under Brodovich and eventually replaced him as Harper Bazaar's art director when Brodovich retired in 1958. He wanted to make his magazines visually beautiful, so his images were simple and conveyed a visual idea. In this cover for Esquire, under the title The Americanization of Paris, he ended up receiving, believe it or not, letters to the editor asking where instant wine could be bought. So here's a beautiful example of the power of imagery. And in this Harper's Bazaar cover, the sophistication and inventiveness of his photographs were really extraordinary. And then lastly, this was a cover for the magazine Show in 1964, where an article on the underground film industry is represented by one of its major stars. In the late 1960s, several influences combined to stifle design. Economic problems and television's erosion of magazines' advertising revenue, and the fact that TV began to take over a book or magazine's traditional role, which was to provide entertainment. But the design approaches developed in New York began to spread to other big cities. And when that happened, a new breed of editorial art director was born, who were both editors and designers, and they helped to shape the view of their publications. One such editor/designer was Dugald Stirner. Ramparts was the magazine, or one of the magazines, that he was the editor and art director of. Ramparts was a periodical for featuring environmental and social issues of the day, such as the Vietnam War. In this cover for Ramparts, done in 1967, you see 4 hands holding and burning their draft cards. One of the hands was Dugald Stirner's, and the other 3 were some of his other editors. This particular image caused such a ruckus that a grand jury was actually convened to investigate whether or not they really did burn their draft cards. Luckily, they were acquitted of all charges, as they actually burned facsimiles and not the actual cards. But you can see the power of imagery in an era like the 1960s in dealing with issues like the Vietnam War. In contrast to Ramparts, Miss Magazine's B. Feitler uses a diverse typographic style and scale to bring expression to this journal of women's rights and opportunities. Notice the cover says, "Goodwill to people, not just men." Her uncanny design sense is displayed in this spread, where she used Garamond's 15th century types to express the content of the article. We're going to step back a little bit and talk about an advertising agency. In 1949, a new ad agency opened in New York. The principal designers were Bill Bernbach as a creative director, Bob Gage as art director, and copywriter Phyllis Robinson. Bernbach wanted to break through the indifference of consumers of the day, and they wanted to look for a creative solution to design problems. And here are two of their very famous ads. I want you to tell me what was the major contribution to design by this advertising firm. Here are some more ads by Doyle, Dane, and Bernbach. Concept was dominant, so the designs were reduced to a few elements. Large visual image, headline of bold weight, and body copy that states its purpose factually with an entertainment value. Mass communication stereotypes were replaced by more realistic images of people, and taboos against representing ethnic minorities were broken. The 1960s saw a large-scale expansion of phototype. I want you to define or explain the phototype process. In this specimen book designed by John Alcor, this introduced 19th century typefaces as phototype, but with the 20th century spacing and color. Now, a typographic genius was needed to bring the best out of modern day phototypography. That man was Herb Lubalin. Space and surface became his primary visual considerations. He thought of the alphabet characters as both visual form and a way to communicate a message. Here are a few of his examples. As phototype aided in the production of new typefaces, piracy became an issue. So, Lubalin, with a few of his peers, established the International Typeface Corporation. The ICT typefaces had a major effect on design, and by the end of the 1960s, metal type was virtually a thing of the past. So I want you to consider, what do you think was Lubalin's legacy? Lubalin also made significant contributions to editorial design during the 1960s, as seen by these pages and spreads from Eros magazine. By 1970, he began to lean more toward typeface design, as illustrated by this logotype for Avant-Garde magazine. This logo's tightly integrated ligatures was developed into a family of geometric sans serif typefaces bearing the same name. He saw the designer's job as one of projecting a message from a surface using three interdependent means of expression: photography, illustration, and letter forms. And finally, today I want to talk about George Lois. He was an employee of Doyle, Dane, Bernbach during the late 1950s. And he was really a rebel and earned quite a reputation for himself from such stunts as climbing out on a third-story ledge of an office building, demanding that his poster be approved. He adopted Bernbach's philosophy that fully integrated visual-verbal concepts were vital to successfully convey a message. His designs were simple and direct. Backgrounds were usually taken out. I want you to tell me what historical style can be compared to his design ideal. He left several firms even after co-founding one. In 1962, Esquire magazine was in big trouble and asked Lois to develop effective cover designs. Over the next decade, he designed 92 covers for them. Carl Fisher was the main photographer who understood Lois's ideas. Their collaborative efforts created incredible covers. Here are two of them, and we're going to take a closer look in class to some of these design for Esquire magazine that he did, because they're really just completely fantastic, and each cover comes with a narrative, so you kind of find out what he was thinking as a designer and what the historical context of each cover was too. So, in conclusion, the New York School came out of European modernism and was the dominant force from the 1940s to the 1960s in American editorial and advertising design.